Hello, welcome to Axiom Flux News. Today's date's the 28th of March 2015. I'm joined on the panel with Derek from New York. Hi Derek.
Hello, hello.
Tonight we're going to be discussing TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. We're going to be digging into what all that is and bringing you all you need to know. We've also got an article from all about Hillary Clinton that Derek's going to be sharing with us. But to start us off with, we're going to move straight into this now, because in this article that you can see dated on the 7th of October 2014 says, what is TTIP? And 6 reasons why the answer should scare you. So, the trade negotiations are an assault on democracy. I would vote against them, except, hang on a minute, I can't. So, what is TTIP and the 6 reasons that it should scare you? Well, we're going to go straight into that. Let's start off with, have you ever heard about the TTIP? If your answer is no, don't get too worried about it, because you're not meant to have. So, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership is a series of trade negotiations being carried out mostly in secret between the EU and the US. As a bilateral trade agreement, TTIP is about reducing the regulatory barriers to trade for big business. Things like food safety law, environmental legislation, banking regulations, and the sovereign powers of individual nations. It is, as John Hillary, Executive Director of Campaign Group on War on Want, said, an assault on European and US societies by transnational corporations. So since before the TTIP negotiations began last February, which was the February before this article, which is 7th of October 2014, just as not to confuse you, the secrecy is ongoing, with nearly all information and negotiations coming from leaked documents and freedom of information requests. But worryingly, the covert nature of the talks may well be the least of our problems. Here are the 6 other reasons why you should be scared of the TTIP, and very scared indeed. So the first one here is the NHS. Public services, especially the NHS, are in the firing line. One of the main aims of TTIP is to open up Europe's public health, education and water services to US companies. This could essentially mean the privatisation of the NHS. The European Commission has claimed that public services will be kept out of TTIP. However, according to the Huffington Post, the UK Trade Minister Lord Livingston has admitted that talks about the NHS were still on the table. Number 2 is the food and environmental safety. TTIP's regulatory convergence agenda will seek to bring EU standards on food safety and the environment closer to those of the US. The US regulations are much less strict, with 70% of all processed food sold in the US supermarkets now containing genetically modified ingredients. By contrast, the EU allows virtually no GM foods. The US also has far laxer restrictions on the use of pesticides. It also uses growth hormones in its beef, which are restricted in Europe due to links to cancer. US farmers have tried to have these restrictions lifted repeatedly in the past through the World Trade Organization, and it is likely that they will use the TTIP to do so again. The same goes for the environment, where the EU's REACH regulations are far tougher on potentially toxic substances. In Europe, a company has to prove a substance is safe before it can be used. In the US, the opposite is true. Any substance can be used until it is proven unsafe. As an example, The EU currently bans 1,200 substances from use in cosmetics. The US is just 12. So, well, I'll go through all these 6 and then we'll take your comments from each one, Derek, if that's alright. Banking regulations is in at number 3. The TTIP cuts both ways. The UK, under the influence of all-powerful City of London, is thought to be seeking a loosening of the US banking regulations. America's financial rules are tougher than ours. They were put into place after the financial crisis to directly curb the powers of bankers and avoid a similar crisis happening again. TTIP, it is feared, will remove those restrictions, effectively handing all those powers back to the bankers. So number 4 is privacy. Remember the ACTA, the ACTA, the Anti-Counterfeiting Trade Agreement? It was thrown out by a massive majority in the European Parliament in 2012 after a huge public backlash against what was rightly seen as an attack on individual privacy, where internet service providers would be required to monitor people's online activity. Well, it's feared that TTIP could be bringing back ACTA's central elements, proving that if the democratic approach doesn't work, there's always the back door. An easing of data privacy laws and a restriction of public access to pharmaceutical companies' clinical trials are also thought to be on the cards. Number 5 is jobs. So the EU has admitted that TTIP will probably cause unemployment as jobs switch to the US, where labour standards and trade union rights are lower. It has even advised EU members to draw on European support funds to compensate for the expected unemployment. Examples from other similar bilateral trade agreements around the world support the case for job losses. The North American Free Trade Agreement, abbreviated NAFTA, between the US, Canada and Mexico caused the loss of 1 million US jobs over 12 years, instead of the hundreds of thousands of extra that were promised. And the last but probably not the most least concerning is the actual democracy, as TTIP's biggest threat to society is its inherent assault on democracy. One of the main aims of TTIP is the introduction of investor-state dispute settlements, abbreviated the ISDS, which allow companies to sue governments if those governments' policies cause a loss of profits. In effect, it means unelected transnational corporations can dictate the policies of democratically elected governments. ISDSs are already in place in other bilateral trade agreements around the world and have led to such injustices as in Germany, where Swedish energy company Vattenfall is suing the German government for billions of dollars over its decision to phase out nuclear power plants in the wake of the Fukushima disaster in Japan. Here we see a public health policy put into place by a democratically elected government being threatened by an energy giant. Because of a potential loss of profit, nothing could be more cynically anti-democratic. There are around 500 similar cases of businesses versus nations going on around the world at the moment, and they are all taking place before arbitration tribunals made up of corporate lawyers appointed on an ad hoc basis, which, according to War on Want's John Hillary, are, in quotes, little more than kangaroo courts, end quote, with an open quote, a vested interest in ruling in favour of business, end quote. So I don't know about you, but I'm scared. I would vote against TTIP, except, hang on a minute, I can't, like you. I have no say whatsoever in whether TTIP goes through or not. All I can do is tell as many people about it as possible, as I hope will you, and may be forced to accept an attack on democracy, but we can at least fight against the conspiracy of silence. So in short, the TTIP says, well, for the TTIP, would you vote for this? This is the question. Public services, including our NHS, put up for sale. Corporations suing our own government. dangerous pesticides like GM and additives in our food. TTIP is a big deal, but politicians would rather we didn't know about it. It's a trade negotiation between the EU and US, and it's been hashed out in secret in Brussels. If it passes, we will be trading away our democracy and giving corporations more power over the fate of our vital public services. But there's an election coming up, and politicians know that they need to listen to us if they want our votes. We can make sure the candidates hoping to be our next MP say no to TTIP and cut this deal off before it's too late. So I'm going to take you to the 1 to 6 on your comments and thoughts, Derek. I know you're not going to be too much aware on the NHS because as this is coming from a UK angle. I guess it does really affect you in, as they'd like to put it across, I think it's going to be bringing something like £80 billion to America and only 10 for the UK. Okay, let me see this. This is the BBC's version of it, of the TTIP. As you can see there in the image, you've got Obama on the left, King Cameron in the middle, and Angela Merkel on the right side. There you go. You should be able to see that now. So TTIP, the EU-US trade deal explained. This is from the BBC, so do take caution as we read this. David Cameron is meeting other EU leaders and industry bodies at CBI-hosted talks in Brussels, hoping to inject fresh impetus into talks on the transatlantic trade deal. Supporters say it will boost economies. Critics call it anti-democratic. Just bear in mind that this article is from 18th of December 2014. I'm going to be taking you into a timeline very shortly of the build-up over the previous years regarding TTIP and how things have materialised on that basis. So what is the TTIP? The BBC have put it across as the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, now generally known as TTIP, is primarily a deal to cut tariffs and regulatory barriers to trade between the US and EU countries, making it easier for companies on both sides of the Atlantic to access each other's markets. Industries it would affect include pharmaceuticals, cars, energy, finance, chemicals, clothing, and food and drink. Pretty much the most used there. So what do supporters say it will achieve? The British government claims TTIP could add 10 billion to the UK economy, and 80 billion pounds to the US, and 100 billion to the EU every year. Apparently, it says shoppers would benefit by the removal of EU import tariffs on popular goods such as jeans and cars. It also claimed that reducing regulation would help UK businesses export to the US, with small businesses in particular predicted to benefit. And supporters say restrictive markets would be opened up. For example, currently British lamb and venison cannot be exported to the US. David Cameron has promised to put rocket boosters behind talks to secure the deal, saying TTIP is central to his vision of a reformed competitive Europe. TTIP is also supported by the Lib Dems, the Labour, UKIP and the SNP, the Scottish National Party. They all broadly support it with caveats of the NHS. The Plagues is more sceptical and the Green Party is strongly opposed. So how did it all come about? Let's look into this, because the leaders at the EU-US summit back in November 2011, they set up a working group to find ways to increase growth and competitiveness. Given shared concerns over economic stagnation and frustration at the lack of progress in the Doha around of multilateral trade negotiations, the working group reported in February of 2013, recommending Comprehensive bilateral trade agreement, which became the TTIP. The TTIP is one of the 10 priorities of Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the European Commission. So this is the timeline. In November 2011, the US and EU leaders agree action is needed to boost the trade and revive stagnant economies on both sides of the Atlantic. And then we had to wait a fair while, a year or so, for June 2013, where the TTIP negotiations was launched. The following month, July 2013, first negotiating round in which 24 working groups, each representing a policy or trade area, are established. And then it's a further 6 months in January 2014, European Commission announces a freeze of negotiations over the investment section of the TTIP, pending the outcome of a consultation. Further on 9 months in September 2014, outgoing EU Trade Commissioner Karel de Gucht warns there is a danger that the TTIP will not be agreed by the original deadline of 2015, and that the US presidential election in 2016 could further delay negotiations. So how is it being negotiated, you might ask? Well, the EU's Trade Commissioner, currently Cecilia Malmström, takes the lead in trade talks. The Commission consults the UK and other EU governments during the negotiations through the Trade Policy Committee, made up of senior officials from each member state. Negotiators have been meeting alternately in Brussels and Washington. What is the main focus of the negotiations? Tariffs between the EU and US are already low, averaging around 3%, and both sides foresee they will be eliminated under the agreement. The main focus of negotiations is on harmonizing regulations, reducing non-tariff barriers to trade, or getting rid of them if they're deemed unnecessary. For instance, US and EU regulators have different requirements for testing the safety of cars, drugs, and soft furnishings. Going through the different tests is expensive for firms, particularly in developing new medicines. TTIP aims to reduce those costs by bringing in common standards. Other areas being contemplated include protection for foreign investors, cooperation to achieve greater participation by small businesses in EU and US trade, and a controversial procedure to resolve investment disputes between the US and the EU. So the opposition to the TTIP, hands off democracy, hashtag no TTIP. Critics say TTIP's powers for companies to sue governments are anti-democratic. Let's move further north of the border, and we're going into Scotland. Sorry, that's not the one. Going into Scotland, this one. The SNP candidate, TTIP deal and attack on democracy. This is quite recent, on 29th of March this year. Chris Stevens, second right standing, has called the proposed TTIP trade deal a dangerous attack on democracy. So a controversial European Union-US trade deal would be Thatcherism's ultimate triumph if left unaltered, according to an SNP candidate. So, as the SNPs were part of the rest of the other main parties that were pro-TTIP, Chris Stevens, who is standing in Glasgow Southwest, told the party's conference that the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, which aims to remove barriers between the EU and the US, was a dangerous attack on democracy. Supporters say the trade deal would make it easy to buy and sell goods and services and open up markets, but critics fear it poses a threat to public services, particularly the health service. The Scottish Government does not have a formal role in the ongoing negotiations, but has made representations to the UK Government and the European Commission on the issue. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, has joined calls for the NHS in Scotland to be protected from private healthcare providers in the US. The SNP conference in Glasgow passed a resolution expressing concern about a lack of transparency in the negotiations and calling for public services to be protected. Mr. Stevens said, in quotes, Due to the minimal scrutiny and lack of transparency, the current proposals for TTIP represent the most dangerous attack on our democracy and the key role of government in improving our public services and our living and working conditions. If left unaltered, TTIP would represent Thatcherism's ultimate triumph. The highest of standards in goods and services lowered, the lowest of standards in health and safety, the eradication of social and employment rights. Voters and their elected government should decide the role and function of public services, not faceless directors in boardrooms. The SNP MEP and Smith added, TTIP is work in progress, but it's valid for us to say that we are unhappy about the content, and we are unhappy about the progress thus far that we have seen. It's being negotiated in secret, and that's not in itself unusual in a trade deal. But TTIP is not a regular trade deal. TTIP has way more significant implications for Scotland's trade and Scotland's democracy. I do not see sufficient safeguards within TTIP to keep Scotland's provision of public services safe. Until we see specific exemptions on the face of the TTIP document that specifically cover Scotland's public services, we won't back TTIP. So with Scotland, with the SNP saying they've seen the alarm, the alarms ringing and heard them, and realising now that it's not worth backing until it can be backed up, with the apparent, positive things it's supposed to bring. But we'll see about that and how this turns out. Brings me back to beware the TTIP charm offensive, which I should have really showed you before, basically stating what the parties are up to. Just, running up to the election here. An article from The Guardian on 17th of March 2015. The next few days will see a TTIP charm offensive. Some EU leaders will make renewed PR efforts to flog this deal to the public and conclude negotiations by the end of the year. The Centre for Economic Policy Research estimates that the EU's combined GDP will be boosted by 0.5% in the 10 years after TTIP's implementation. Even if such projections are correct, what is lacking is a guarantee that any benefits would be evenly distributed or benefit the poorest. When 92% of those involved in consultations have been corporate lobbyists, citizens are right to suspect that TTIP will benefit corporations at the expense of democracy. MEPs must sign an agreement banning us from sharing any of the contents of secret papers with those that we represent. There are many reasons to oppose this deal, but be aware of the pro-TTIP hype while we continue to keep up the pressure to have it dropped. That was Jean Lambert, MEP Green London, Keith Taylor, MEP Green South East England, Molly Scott Cato, MEP Green South West England. So there you go. Watch out for it. It's coming your way. The charm offensive, that is. We're going to do everything we can to raise awareness on TTIP so everybody can make their own decision and bring it to their own representative MP, and let's try and get this dealt with. So these are things you can do. This is stopttip.org, stop-ttip.org, that is. It's a self-organised European citizens initiative against TTIP, and another one called CETA, or CETA as people are saying it. Stop these sinister trade deals, as you can see. Target at 2 million, but currently at 1.623, 474 million. You've got up until October of this year to gather the remaining ones. So if you'd like to sign this, you could do so by visiting this site here and take action by clicking the button there. But don't just jump to it unless you're actually aware of what this TTIP contains. But if you're still not sure, let's continue with a few more recent articles from the mainstream, well, party, but it is now becoming mainstream. Opaque and undemocratic TTIP, a threat to NHS and public services, say MPs. It's just another article here. Goes on the dangers of TTIP regarding the NHS in particular, and many other things, as we've shown earlier on. The start of this TTIP information presentation that I'm doing. Britain's next government must have the freedom to develop the NHS without legal challenges stemming from the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Parliament's Business, Innovation and Skills Committee has warned in a scathing report examining the controversial trade deal's implications for Britain. The cross-party committee of MPs called upon the government to produce harder evidence that TTIP could boost Britain's economy by 100 billion a year. Well, as the other article showed on the BBC, they've had it down as only 10 billion a year for Britain. The 100 billion a year was for the EU. But, you know, the committee also warned the government needs to make a stronger argument for backing the investor-state dispute settlement, a clause in TTIP that would pave the way for private firms to sue governments in cases where national parliaments' policies threaten companies' profits. European and US negotiators have been embroiled in talks for almost 18 months to create TTIP, the biggest free trade and investment agreement the world has ever seen. The ambitious agreement would strive to create a unified single market of approximately 1 billion consumers, covering half the globe. It will attempt to harmonise trade regulations and scrap tariffs from California to Bosnia. I'm not going to go too much into this particular article here. You can actually bring it up and have a look for yourself. Just at the end here, Campaigns and Policy Chief at Global Justice Now, Polly Jones, told the RT the committee's report highlights concerns on TTIP shared by many UK citizens. She said that secrecy relating to the TTIP, the ISDS, the lack of evidence to substantiate the benefits and the threat to public services are foremost in people's minds. Not the actual threat on democracy itself, but, you know, the benefits and services come before the democracy. Jones, who gave oral and written evidence to the committee, said the report reveals the extent to which the government is out of step in aggressively pushing this controversial trade deal. As David Cameron said, he's going to put his rocket boosters on making sure these talks get put through. She called upon the next government to address the serious concerns highlighted in the committee's report. So you can tell your MP candidates to scrap the TTIP also by going to this one at 38 degrees. The text of the TTIP trade deal has been leaked and is confirmed one of our biggest fears: our NHS is at risk. Cooked up by a corporate lobbyist in Brussels, the dodgy EU-US trade deal could allow US corporations to carve up our health service. We need a big public outcry to stop it, and we need to turn up the heat on the politicians who have the power to scrap it. Can you sign the local petition telling our MP candidates to protect our public services and come out against TTIP? Enter our postcode below to get started. So if you want to follow this route through the 38 degrees, you can do so. You can also go to the stop-ttip.org website and act on that. Just going back over this, which also brings in the CETA, keep Europe out of the tar sands in this article. It says currently very little tar sands oil is flowing through UK petrol pumps, yet few European citizens are aware that our governments are in the midst of free trade negotiations known as CETA or CETA, or however you want to pronounce it. That could significantly boost Europe's involvement in the world's most disruptive project. Luckily, the EU is also in the process of passing the Fuel Quality Directive, the FQD, This legislation could ensure tar sands are strongly discouraged from entering the EU because of their high carbon intensity, and effective ban on increased imports of the dirty fuel. However, aggressive lobbying from the Canadian government and oil companies is aiming to block this move. So what is this CETA all about? Well, the proposed Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement threatens to undermine stricter tar sands regulations on Canada and stronger climate policies in Europe. The deal could pave the way for increased tar sand oil imports into Europe and give dramatic new powers to Europe's multinational oil companies. It could trample over indigenous rights and undermine a range of social and environmental legislation on both sides of the Atlantic. Perhaps most controversially, CETA includes an investment chapter that would grant Canadian and European companies the right to sue governments when environmental policies interfere with their profits. Similar rules in NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, have already been used extensively by US firms to challenge environmental and resource-related policy in Canada. Canadian firms have also used these tools in other bilateral trade deals to attack environmental and mining-related decisions by foreign governments. Several EU-based oil companies, including Shell, BP, and Total, already have major investments in the tar sands and would benefit from the proposed CETA investment rules. Under these rules, any attempt by a Canadian government to regulate the extent or pace of tar sands development by the EU-based companies would be vulnerable to challenge. Furthermore, Canada has been invoking CETA to argue that the Fuel Quality Directive, if passed to include tar sands, would be an illegal trade barrier. In order to protect the EU's ability to make strong, effective climate policy, CETA must include a clause that carves out the FQD and future EU climate legislation so that it is protected from any such legal challenge. Recent action here. We hosted a delegation of civil society representatives from Canada and helped them lobby UK decision makers during their one-day stop in London, part of a European lobbying busting tour. A Climate Action Network report revealed that Canadian government's dirty lobbying tactics, including the close collaboration with the UK government. On the eve of the publication of the CAM report, we joined people across Europe and the US standing vigil outside Canadian consulates. In our case, it turned into an impromptu demonstration when a very relevant meeting was held inside the High Commission. On Valentine's Day, the lovely people of Lush had an oil orgy on Cornmarket Street in Oxford to highlight the UK government's refusal to support the FQD. Emily cornered Norman Baker to ask why he refuses to support the FQD. His response was unhelpful, as usual. With our friends from South Coast Climate Camp, People on Planet, Lush, and Friends of the Airflows, we targeted Norman Baker in his local constituency, complete with a roaming tar monster. Along with several other organisations, we delivered an advance petition containing 52,000 signatures to UK Minister for Transport Norman Baker, demanding the UK supports the inclusion of tar sands in the Fuel Quality Directive. We used International Stop the Tar Sands Day as an opportunity to call the UK government to account for bowing down to Canadian lobbying. We worked with the Council of Canadians on a lobby busting tour to make sure that European decision makers are aware of Canadian support for the EU Fuel Quality Directive. And that's pretty much the updates on TTIP. Before we do finish on this one, I'd like to bring you to a little audio recording that I had with a conversation I had with Blackhole Bridger, where he put a question forth and gave us his little summary on what he thinks is capable, TTIP is capable of perhaps doing. So I will share that recording from earlier today with you.
I'm just here with talking to Blackwell Bridger regarding TTIP, and he's asking the question: what sovereignty are we going to have left when corporations take our country to court and fine them? So, what are we thinking with this, Blackwell? How are you viewing TTIP?
Yeah, well, I'm viewing TTIP. If we join TTIP, it means we join the club and we have to live by their rules and regulations. Now, if the law of our land prevents a corporation, that's any corporation, whatever they want to do, from setting up in this country and doing what they want to do, and they lose money of it, they can take our country to court and fine our country, basically taxpayers' money. So therefore, following that, to stop the loss of money, that means we're going to have to alter our laws to accommodate them to do whatever they wish to our country, which basically means the total loss of their sovereignty and the total takeover of our country by the corporations.
And what exactly is it that needs to be done to put a stop to this? I mean,
it's not to sign up to TTIP in the first place, because if we don't sign up into their club, they can't fine us.
But us as individuals, we don't really have a vote on it, do we? All we can do is just raise awareness.
But we've got to stop our politicians signing up for them and educate them what is happening, because they obviously don't know it. They felt, yes, this should be done.
Well,
because it means, say for instance, let's just say for example, we put a moratorium completely on fracking.
Yeah.
And a fracking company from abroad, like already we've got a French company fracking in England, yeah, and we got a moratorium on, they can say they're losing X billions or trillions of dollars of business, and our country will get the fine. So we've got to stop our politicians signing up for TTIP, because all TTIP is the EU on steroids. You think we've had problems since we've joined the EU with losing our sovereignty? You haven't seen anything yet.
That's it, and it affects many other things like the NHS and your jobs and other things.
Everything.
Pretty much everything.
Everything.
Yeah. And the other concern, not going too far away from topic, Blackwell, is when you mentioned foreign companies like, that French company with the fracking. The southern part of England is actually owned to France, is it not?
Yeah, that's right. It's the aftermath.
Okay, so that was the recording that actually got cut off a little bit too soon towards the end. But Blackwell will be joining us hopefully very shortly to give us a report on Melanie Shaw. So for those that are interested in Melanie Shaw's bad case, we will be bringing that, Blackwell will be bringing that to you within the next few days. Surely before the vigil, we should have it all uploaded on the website for you. I do believe we've got Derek back. Connection's a little bit bad there earlier. Derek, are you with us? Don't have any audio coming from you, Derek. No. Don't appear to have any audio from Derek there, so I will show you the article that Derek was wanting to talk about as we try and figure something out to get this put through for this episode of Flux News. Apologise for the live technical glitches here that we've got. This is the article, which is headlined Head of House Benghazi probe says Hillary Clinton wipes email server clean. It's from the Fox News. I'm going to get Derek's thoughts and opinions from another recording, and I will attach that on the end of this so we can continue on this story.
Adamship of California. What do you think about his response? That whatever happened here is all on Hillary Clinton?
Chris, we would be exactly where we are regardless of what Secretary Clinton did with her emails. The reality is that we haven't been talking about Secretary Clinton in the committee because they wanted to put off her testimony as far into the presidential cycle as possible, and this is only the most recent justification for that. We have been asking for her to come in. She has volunteered to come in and testify. So I think this is really, unfortunately, just an effort to push this as far into that campaign as possible.
But wait a minute here. I mean, doesn't it bother you that Clinton and her lawyer by themselves decided which of those 60,000 emails were public and government and turned over and which were private, which she deleted? Is that your idea of transparency?
Chris, let's say that she did it exactly the way that we would like, that she had a separate email account for her government emails private. We would be in exactly the same place because people would be saying, well, how can we trust that she only used the official email account when she was supposed to,
I'm not sure it would be exactly the same to the extent that there would have been a contemporaneous record because she would have been sending these, you know, there's a different vantage point in 2015 than there might have been in 2009, 10, and 11 as she was sending these emails on a government account, which she didn't have.
You're giving our committee way too much credit. We'd be exactly where we are because the whole purpose of this committee is really Secretary Clinton. It has long since been about anything else. So we would be in the same place. My chairman, who I respect a great deal, would be saying the same thing. We can't let Secretary Clinton grade her own papers, whatever that means. We can't let her have decided which to put on the official email, which to use for her private email. So we need that server anyway.
So you think this was adequate transparency on her part?
I think that we ought to handle the situation exactly as we did in a very similar situation in the last administration. And that is President Chief of Staff under George W. Bush. White House officials were using the Republican National Committee email server for official business. We didn't go and say, we demand to have that server. We need to get the Republican server to an independent arbiter. No, we said we're going to have people certify with us that they've given us the documents. We're going to talk with them about how they did the searches. We're going to do all the same things we should be doing here.
But that isn't quite what happened because I actually look back, and this was during the whole question of the firing of U.S. attorneys during the George W. Bush administration, and you were one of the people leading the charge saying this was outrageous, that they were using you know, one set of accounts, government accounts, and then doing other business on RNC accounts. You were objecting to that.
I was objecting to politicizing the hiring and firing of U.S. attorneys. Absolutely. That we need the Republican National.
About the fact that they had two.
Absolutely, that's why we're handling this different. I think the reason that we're so reluctant to talk about Jeb Bush's use of his server has everything to do with the presidential race. Why isn't that fair topic for conversation here? He used a private email server for official business. Are we letting Jeb Bush be his own judge and jury? Are we letting him grade his own homework? Because
first of all, he turned over hundreds of thousands of emails. In addition to which, I think you would agree that the security implications of the governor of Florida and the Secretary of State are different. But let me ask you.
But this too, Chris, in fairness, it's taken him 7.5 years. People are criticizing Secretary Clinton for doing this last year, 2 years out. It's taken him 7.5 years, and we're still getting documents from Governor Bush.
I want to ask you about this Form 109, the separation statement. It's awfully clear, and basically every employee of the State Department has to sign and swear that they have turned over all of their papers, all classified and unclassified, that they had when they were in the office in the State Department. And if they don't, if they sign it and they have broken that pledge, it's a felony. They could go to prison. They could be disqualified from public office. Did she live up to this pledge?
What I don't know if she signed it, and I assume we'll find out. I hope we find out about whether all fire secretaries have signed it.
But let's talk about her.
Let's also talk about Benghazi, Chris, because
No, I'm asking you about. Forgive me.
Yes.
I'm asking you about this.
Yeah.
She clearly didn't live up to this pledge. You would agree.
I don't know what the terms of that require. I haven't had a chance
I'll
to study
be able to hand it to you. Basically, it says what I said.
I'd be happy to.
I have turned everything over.
That I acquired. Now, I don't know what that means exactly, and we'd have to study it. But let's be fair about this. We are talking about investigation on Benghazi, right? What does this have to do with Benghazi? And the answer is absolutely nothing. This committee has long since departed from being a committee about Benghazi. It's now a special investigation of Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
Well,
otherwise, what possible relevance does that form?
So if Trey Gowdy is acting as an arm of the RNC to go after Clinton, aren't you in effect acting as an arm of the DNC to protect her?
No, I'm acting as a steward of the House to try to keep a taxpayer-funded investigation on track, doing what it's supposed to be doing. And look, I have great respect for Trey. I like him very much, and I think he has resisted the pressure to turn this into an arm of the RNC. But we knew about this private email server, private emails last August. It's only when this became public in the New York Times that I think the pressure became too great on the chairman and committee to politicize this. And reluctantly, I think that's where we've gone.
I got 30 seconds left. I know you want to talk about this letter that the 47 Republicans sent to the leaders of Iran about the talks over a nuclear deal.
I think it's appalling to interfere in a negotiation like this that the commander-in-chief is engaged in. I think that Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate members, ought to keep their powder dry. Let's see whether there is a deal. Let's see what the terms of that deal are. But I am shocked, and I think it's a terrible thing for the institution.
We're going to have more on that later. Congressman Schiff, thank you. Thanks for coming in today, and we'll follow where your committee goes next.
There you go. That's the article I had there from what Derek sent me earlier, which he did get on to discuss himself, which, because of we having some connection difficulties here, we're not able to actually get him on live, but I think we have got him on another line. So I'm just checking that now to see if that is the case. Right, so I think we have got him. Derek, have you got any thoughts on the article there?
I just want to apologize to the Axiom Curve community. I'm having a series of technical difficulties over here. And as a result, I haven't been able to follow the current show with TJ. But yeah, some of the stuff earlier with the TTIP and whatnot has a lot of stuff pertaining to things that I don't agree with, especially the farming methods, the privacy stuff, which is part of the story that I was going to cover, which has to do with the NSA complex out in Utah. Also, the unemployment rate that will continue to increase, and basically the loss of other democratic rights. All this stuff is very troubling to me, and it should be to everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Call it unconstitutional, and it's something the people can really be the only ones to do anything about. And to do that, we've got to get on to your MP, your representative, and educate them, as Blackwell mentioned earlier, so that we can all be on the same page, come off the same page, and put a stop to this TTIP once and for all. Some are saying it's also high treason, which is, questionable, depending on how far it actually goes. But we will be keeping a very, very close eye on TTIP and the CETA one, or CETA, or whatever you want to say. But on that note, that is the end of today's Flux News. Do join us again next time, and thank you for spending the time here to listen to me going on about TTIP, which is probably something you've never heard of, and Derek's, let's say, inconvenient connection problems. But there you go, it's a live episode for you. Do join us again tomorrow, and do take care, and share this with your friends and family and anybody that you know. But until next time, bye for now. Thank you.